Welcome to episode 6 of the Home and Energy Chats webinar series, The Benefits of Local Wood. My name is Heather Chandler, and I'm the owner and publisher of the Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazines. We have an exciting lineup tonight, and I'm so happy that you have joined us. I would like to start by sharing a special thank you to our sponsors, including our presenting sponsor for this year's Home and Energy Chats, Royal River Heat Pumps. Specializing in the comfort and efficiency of your home, Royal River Heat Pumps offers the highest quality electric heat pump installation and service in Maine. Call for a no-cost site visit with one of their design experts, or check them out online at royalriverheatpumps.com. I would also like to thank our season sponsors, Bath Savings, a local Maine bank that proudly invests in the people, places, and businesses that make Maine strong. Bath Savings, your neighbor, your bank. And Senecal Construction Services, now offering net zero ready design build packages conveniently located minutes from Portland, Freeport, and Brunswick. So thank you to all of our Home and Energy Chat sponsors. Quick overview of our plans for the evening. We will start the webinar with a presentation from each of our panelists and then open it up to discussion with Q&A. So please submit any questions you have for our panelists using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will try our best to get to all of them. And a reminder that the webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our website, greenmainehomes.com, a little bit later this week. So this is a good time to let you know a little bit about us if you're unfamiliar with us. Green and Healthy Maine Homes is a multimedia brand dedicated to inspiring healthy, sustainable, energy smart, and future-ready Maine homes through an online business directory, biannual print magazines, monthly email newsletters, and an active social media presence on Facebook and Instagram. We share expert advice to inspire healthy, comfortable, affordable, efficient, and sustainable Maine homes. So please visit us at greenmainehomes.com to learn more. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Lee Burnett is the project director of Local Woodworks, promoting sustainable forestry and high-value wood products. He maintains their online Maine Wood Guide at localwoodworks.org and organizes conferences and tours. He's been a longtime contributor to Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazines and one of the central figures in Maine working to build our local wood products industry. So welcome, Lee.
Thank you.
And Hal Bumby is the CEO of the Maine Wood Treaters, Inc. in Mechanic Falls. He has over 50 years of wood treatment experience treating poles, pilings, posts, timbers, lumber, and decking with both waterborne and oil-borne preservatives, as well as various fire retardants. He has dedicated his life to the field of wood treatment and promoting local wood species, participating in several studies and advancing wood protection standards to recognize Northeastern species. He holds a speech communication degree from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. Welcome, Hal.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Mike Friedland, who grew up in an apartment building in Brooklyn, New York. It wasn't until he was 21 and on a cross-country road trip that he first saw an actual piece of fruit growing on a tree. When he purchased his own little piece of America, he was lucky to discover a pear tree in the yard. And he says that first year he caught every single pear and made pear upside down cake 5 times. For the past 25 years, he's worked in the building trades and now as part owner of the Lumbery, which is a small lumber store in Cape Elizabeth devoted to selling Maine wood to Mainers. His secret passion is roundabouts, which I need to know more about. So I've never heard of that one before. Welcome, Mike. I'm so excited to have all of you with us this evening for what I know will be a very informative presentation about local wood, why it matters, what to look for, what kind of durability you can expect, where to find it, and how we can grow the market. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Lee to kick off the presentations this evening. Take it away,
Thanks,
Lee.
Heather, and thanks, Rain. This is so great you're doing this. I'm assuming that everybody on the webinar knows about Green and Healthy Maine Homes, but if you don't, it's one of my favorite magazines. You should definitely check it out. It's really well put together, both the content and just very gorgeous. So little plug there. So Local Woodworks, we're a sort of an educational clearinghouse. We're following in the footsteps of the local food movement. Most of what we do is how to source wood locally, but since the title of this is the benefits of local wood, I thought I would just touch just briefly on why we do it. And I could go at great length on any one of these topics, but if you source wood locally, in Maine, you're sourcing good forestry, you're supporting good local jobs, you're reducing carbon footprints, and it's really not that hard to do. So in our book, it's kind of a win-win-win. Anybody can relate to it, anybody can benefit from it and participate in it. And I'm just kind of a cheerleader for it. Hal and Mike are doing it. So you should, listen to them more than me. Next slide, thanks. So one of the tools we have is a website, and we have a directory of something like 150 wood producers in Maine, organized by product categories. It's not searchable yet, but we're making it more interactive. Next, that's on the Local Woodworks website. We also do tours. This year, we still have 4 slots available for a tour on October 27th. This year, we're not taking a bus for COVID reasons. We're going to be driving in private cars, caravan style, which I know is not super efficient, but it's safer. So this year, we're doing it that way. We're going to be visiting a sustainable timber harvest. So you will get a picture of how wood is cut and trucked. We're going to be visiting the wood mill, which is an awesome place in Mercer that does wide plank pine. We're going to be visiting Timber HP, which is the nation's first producer of wood fiber insulation, 3 different kinds of insulation, all from Maine forests. We're also going to be visiting the Maine Woods Pellet Company in Athens, the biggest pellet company in Maine. They also co-generate their heat and electricity. So those are 4 stops. It's going to be 1 day, basically starting in the Augusta area, starting early in the morning, finishing in the afternoon. Okay, next. Another thing we're doing is we're trying to get examples of different products into retail locations that may not have them. And so I've assembled a deck unit and a wall assembly unit just to give examples of options you have that you may not realize. We were going to sort of demo this at the Common Ground Fair for the first time, but that obviously didn't happen. So we're looking for new locations, and we hope to replicate these. One of my main messages, these are all kind of easy substitutions to make, but decking in particular, nobody needs tropical hardwoods. Seriously, there's way superior products in Maine that's going to be, better for your family. It's going to be better for the local economy, and it's going to be way better for environmentally, not to pull these things from all across the globe. This deck unit is assembled with framing from Hal Bumby's place that he can talk more about. But then the wall option has both interior and exterior treatments. I've got a list of where all the products in these came from. I'm not going to read it right now because it'll take a little bit, but anybody who's interested, let me know and I'll email it to you and go from there. Next. One of the products in particular we're really trying to promote is wide plank pine, because it's one of the things about wood is it tends to be a commodity. It's sort of interchangeable. A 2x4 from here is not too much different from a 2x4 from the West Coast, and it's very hard to as a consumer to verify these things. Wide plank pine is not a commodity. It's got a story to it. It was originally, it goes back to colonial days. I'd love to tell you more about that if you want, I can. But for modern times, it has a great story because it's sort of proof of good forestry, because you can only grow wide plank pine from big trees, and you have to practice long-term patient forestry to produce wide plank pine. So we're really trying to promote this as a product available in Maine in a few locations now. We hope more. And I think, do we have one more slide or is that it? Is that it on the slides?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so happy to go in any direction anybody wants to go.
Great. Thank you, Lee. That was a great introduction, and definitely your wood guide is a fantastic resource, and for homeowners and designers and builders, and the wood tours are great for professionals as well. So at this point, I will hand it over to Hal, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of our Maine lumber species and options for maximizing durability. And before I do, just one plug, if you're just joining us, I encourage you to enter any questions you have for any of the panelists in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be getting to questions after the 3 presentations. So take it away, Hal.
Thank you. Lee is very persistent, and the one sad thing about his slide 2 ago was that there wasn't a piece of pressure treated from Maine 5-quarter decking, which he was trying to get me to produce for him for his sample. But one of the things that I recently have done with my son is we purchased an existing sawmill and started producing red pine from the forests of Maine. And but it's been quite the job getting the sawmill up and running. And but Lee's been persistent the whole time trying to get me to get him samples, and I succeeded at least to getting him some 4x6s, and so I use that for his display. Here you have a mailbox post, and that is from the forests of Maine. That is eastern hemlock, incised, and that is a mailbox post that I gave to my neighbor here by the plant, and he put it in 38 years ago, and there you are. It's still in pretty good shape. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit about the treating process, which enables us to utilize the species in Maine. So the next slide, please. And here you have a picture of the ends of a pile of 8x8s southern pine. And southern pine is, of course, what most people think is treated wood. They think it's synonymous with treated wood, and by and large, it actually is. And the reason for that is that southern pine is predominantly a sapwood species rather than a heartwood species. And you can, looking at this cross section, you can see the circle of heartwood surrounded by what is sapwood. And the sapwood is a very treatable part of a tree. So those species that are very heavy to sapwood are very treatable. Go to the next slide, please. And here are the cross sections. The picture on the top is a species heavy to sapwood, which in Maine, the species of softwood that's heavy to sapwood is red pine. And then the down towards the bottom there is what most of the softwoods in Maine are, which would be somewhat similar to hemlock, very heavy to heartwood. Now, sapwood is the living portion of the tree. When sawed into lumber, the cells of the sapwood are still open, in order to pass the sap or the nourishment from cell to cell. And when that lumber is dry, that sapwood is still very porous and very easily treated. Now, the other key to keep in mind, though, is that untreated sapwood is the least durable. So if you put a piece of southern pine outside or a piece of red pine outside, untreated, its best durability is like 3 to 5 years. And so it's kind of, if it's easy to decay, it's easy to treat, and so on. Take the next slide, please. Which is the next slide is a picture of, well, it didn't go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, the picture on the top is a piece of hard to treat heartwood. In this case, it would be hemlock. And you see those little slits in the sides, and those are incisions. The purpose of those incisions is twofold. And Lee kind of had to remind me of one of them, and that is they enhance the preservative penetration of something that's hard to treat. And so we incise the wood, we get better penetration. It's still not as good as a sapwood piece, like the piece down below, but the theory is that if you treat the wood beyond the point where it will crack, the piece of hard to treat material, in this case hemlock, will last just as long as a piece of easy to treat southern pine. And so preservative treatment increases the durability of the wood by a factor of 5 to 10 times. Next slide, please. This is a picture of some southern pine at my plant. And of course, southern pine, as I mentioned earlier, is a sapwood species. We can readily and easily treat sapwood species. We increase the untreated durability, which is, as I mentioned earlier, somewhere around between 3 and 5 years in ground contact. We increase that durability properly treated by a factor of 10 times. So the treated southern pine or the treated red pine will have a durability estimated at a 50-year life expectancy. Next slide, please. Okay, this kind of got out of order here. These are the end shots of red pine. Red pine, again, is a sapwood species. You can see the heartwood, you can see the sapwood. The sapwood is very treatable. Go to the next slide, please. Here is incised hemlock. This is fresh treated. And the untreated durability of hemlock in ground contact in Maine would be somewhere around 10 years maximum. By virtue of the fact that we've incised it, we've treated it under a very long cycle, we increase the durability of this we can't do as good a job of treating it as southern pine or red pine. So we only increase its durability by a factor of 5. But untreated, it's 10 years times 5 gives you the same 50-year life that you would get with southern pine. So if you want a durable treated wood product from the forests of Maine, you have two options. You have red pine or incised eastern hemlock. Next slide, please. And this is red pine. You would have a very difficult time telling the difference between this and the slide I showed earlier of southern pine. It looks and treats just like southern pine, but it grows in Maine. And you can utilize it for all the same end uses. It'll have the same type of durability. Next slide, please. And here we are again, back to the incised eastern hemlock. Now, if you look around in Maine and you're driving around on the highways, you'll see the signposts along the side, and most of them are incised eastern hemlock. Everything west of the Rocky Mountains is incised and treated western hemlock, but eastern hemlock treats just as well and is just as durable. Now that incised hemlock mailbox post is still going strong after 37 years of in service. The fence boards in the background are also treated hemlock fence boards after approximately 36 years of service. So there are species that can be treated in Maine that will provide you the same type of durability as you get in the regular pressure treated world. And if you want something that looks exactly like southern pine, that's the red pine. If you want something that looks like western hemlock, that's what they use for treated wood in the West, that's eastern hemlock. I guess that's about what I have to say.
Thank you, Hal. It's very helpful to know and pretty impressive, 37 years. My neighbor's fence doesn't look like that. It's fairly new.
Yep.
I know there are going to be a lot of follow-up questions, but we will finish the presentations and then circle back around with those questions. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Mike, who has some ideas to help us grow the market for Maine wood species. So take it away, Mike.
Great, thanks Heather, thanks Lee, thanks Hal, and welcome everyone. A small bit of background, I am one of the owners of the Lumbery in Cape Elizabeth, and we are a small lumber yard, also a hardware store, but I think we're the first of our kind in the state where we really try and focus on where your wood comes from and where your money goes, which are two key factors for us. And a lot of people don't realize, but when you visit a box store or even some lumber yards, they have piles of wood, but they're not branded, so it's hard to tell what came from where. And if you look closely, some could come from Europe or Canada or the West Coast. So part of my presentation is, well, I've titled it, Why Isn't Local Wood Sold Locally, or What's in a Name? And this is basically exploring the interconnectedness of the lack of local wood options with the importance of creating a recognizable brand. So we could actually go into a store and say, I want Maine wood, and it would be definitely recognizable from not Maine wood. Next slide, please. So here you've got a picture of, I mean, obviously there's a lake in there, but this is the Maine woods, taken from the top of Bigelow Mountain. And some facts first. So Maine, I'm not sure everyone knows this, but Maine is the most forested state in the lower 48. I mean, it's stunning. Next slide, please. And so Maine has 8.3 million acres that are certified as sustainably managed by independent auditors of the SFI, the FSC, the ATFS, and that's about 50% of Maine's working forest. So Maine has an abundance of sustainably managed forests. Next slide, please. And other things to note that buying local Maine wood has its advantages. There are some obvious ones, that it keeps jobs and tax dollars within the state. And another one, which should be obvious, is that it reduces carbon emissions. Oftentimes, well, wood gets brought in from out of state. An example of that might be red cedar. I've been a carpenter for 25 years, and if I had a job that required cedar, I'd call the lumber yard and they would send red cedar. There were no options. They didn't say white or red, they just sent red. Even though white cedar is prolific in Maine. And so this unnecessary transport of comparable goods it just creates a larger carbon footprint due to this unnecessary transport of goods. And the other benefit of purchasing wood locally is that it goes to these small family-owned mills. And that at the Lumbery, that's our focus, is on these small family mills, because it's these microeconomies in these towns, and it's almost like a spider web around the mill, which affects the loggers, the truckers, the landowners, the convenience stores, gas stations, bankers, insurance agents. So buying local, especially these small family-owned mills, is truly targeted, impactful, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. So with all these benefits of Maine wood, the question is, why isn't Maine wood a thing that we ask for? We're the pine tree state, so why aren't we going into the lumber store and saying, I want Maine pine? It's just not a thing. We don't do that. I never did that. Next slide, please. And conversely, almost everyone associates Maine with lobster. You'd think pine tree state would be Maine pine, but it's like people think of Maine, they think of lobster. And no one ever asks for a New York lobster. It doesn't work. Which brings me to the second part, which is a name. Why is a name so important? It's important to have a recognizable name that we could associate with a product, and it could be it represents quality, uniqueness. And when I say uniqueness, I mean, it could be the taste of something, it could be a special feature, it could be an associated experience that you had with it. It's these stories and these details that really create a connectivity to a product. And that's why it's so important to have just a recognizable label, because these in turn, bring customer loyalty. Next slide, please. So the goal is to find out if Maine wood can inspire customer loyalty, which was, we opened the Lumbery about a year ago, but 2 years ago, we set out to see if selling Maine wood is a viable business. Is there plenty of wood in Maine? Is there quality wood in Maine? And what's the price point? If Maine wood is 3 to 4 times more than the wood in the lumber yard, no one's going to buy it. So basically, we set out on a mission to see if we can sell Maine wood in Maine. Next. And as you can see here from this picture at Yoder's sawmill, this is gorgeous wood. There is plenty of superior quality wood in Maine. This is all white cedar that is set out to dry. Next slide. And there are plenty of family-owned mills in Maine, and I know I shouldn't pick favorites, but I'm going to say this is Steve Hopkins here at Hopkins Mill up in Holton, and I'm going to say this is the best mill I visited. It's pretty much a one-man operation, and if he wasn't milling trees, he'd probably be at NASA. His place is just a museum. It's gorgeous. I highly recommend going, especially during maple syrup season. Next slide, please. And then the other thing we discovered is that the mills are unique. This here is Butler's Mill, where they make cedar shakes. And I say they, but it's really just one guy in this tiny little mill, but he's a giant personality, and he will tell you his cedar shakes are the best shakes on the planet, and he's right. Next slide, please. And then, from our trials, it became obvious that the people of the mills, the loggers, the truckers, they all inspire you. They're definitely worthy of brand loyalty. This is Dan here up at Blueberry Hill Farm. And Dan used to be a logger, and now he's got a wood miser, and he mills wood, and he gets all his logs from his buddies. He also taps trees for syrup. He's got a mushroom farm, and he sells veggies, and it's just him. Next slide, please. And another great thing to note, and from every mill I went to, they all said the same thing, that all their trees were, well, they didn't say sustainably harvested, although I take it that they were sustainably harvested, all from land within 40 miles of the mill. So this again cuts down on the transportation impact, which relates to, carbon footprint, where basically from land to mill to my store, it's the shortest distance that any tree could travel. Next slide, please. So the first conclusion is that yes, Maine wood does have all the qualities necessary to inspire brand loyalty. It's an overwhelming yes. Maine wood is incredible. Next slide, please. So the question is, how do we get consumers to buy Maine wood? Next slide, please. Well, number one, we need to create a name or certification that embodies high quality Maine wood produced at small scale Maine mills. This here is a picture of Maine Cedar Store up in Portage, Maine. It's another gorgeous historic mill. I think all his equipment is over 100 years old and makes it work. It's incredible. So anyway, we need to come up with a name. So what should we call our new brand of Maine wood? Next slide. Obviously, this is meant to be lighthearted, but it just seems just so coincidental that our governor's name is Janet Mills. So maybe our first take could be Janet's Mills, which could just cover all Maine wood. Next slide. So we also need to present the consumer with options, with better alternatives to what's currently available. I've been to the box store so many times, and there's twisted boards. So we need to present straight boards. We need to give variety: hemlock, white cedar, pine, rough sawn, shiplap, live edge. We just need to present the consumer with so many wonderful options for Maine. We need to make sure our pricing is comparable. We should tell the story of the mills, how the tree travels, the steps along the chain of custody, all the stops it makes. And then we should definitely tell them about the carbon footprint, because people are so interested in green building these days. And, architects are focusing on sourcing their materials locally. Next slide, please. The second conclusion I came up with is that there's strength in numbers. So ideally, combining inventories from multiple small family mills, it would allow for brand variety, and it would create a greater capacity to meet demand and accessibility. I just got a call the other day from a carpenter at Woodhole Construction. They're a branch of Wright Ryan, and he was looking for white cedar 1x6 tongue and groove. And the local mill that he goes to is about 12 weeks out. And that's common practice for the small family mills, is that they can't, it's very hard for them to keep up with demand. And if we just gather together as a group, we could create a great supply of Maine wood where any customer could come in anytime and just pick up anything. This is a big dream of mine. Next slide, please. A super example of this is Cabot. It's such a recognizable brand. We all associate it with great cheese. There's so many varieties of cheese. And I don't know if everyone knows this, and I'll read this verbatim. Every morning since 1919, when 94 families from Cabot, Vermont formed a cooperative to ensure their livelihood, they knew that they were stronger together than they were apart. Cabot is owned by 800 farm families throughout New England and New York. Essentially, Cabot takes the focus away from all the tiny mills and just puts them all together under one umbrella that just becomes super recognizable. And this, I feel personally, is what we need for Maine wood. We need a brand so that someone could go into a Home Depot and they could say, we want, Maine wood. And under that Maine wood umbrella would be everything vetted that came through Maine. Next slide, please. And then the third thing we need to do is we need to educate the consumer. So we need to let them know what the Maine brand is all about. And as soon as someone steps in my store and I haven't seen them before, I go into this long speech about the benefits of Maine wood. I tell them about the mills. If they're interested in a certain piece of wood, I tell them exactly where it came from, who the mill owner is, and then I let them see the high quality of it, and I tell them the price is the same as if they go to a box store. So it's sort of, once they realize that they could get wood from me that's better quality, that comes from Maine at the same price point, they just keep coming back. It's not a hard sell. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the end, and I went over this a little bit already, but the point of our store is to tell people where their wood comes from and where their money goes, which are just two major parts, environmentally and socially. We want to have minor impact on the environment, and we want to make sure the money that we're spending is not necessarily going to investors, but is actually going to the people that do the work. And in our store, we have a map on our wall, and this map isn't completely filled out because we've gotten more mills since then. But I'm able to point on the map and show them exactly where their wood came from, and sort of like the synapses connect. And there's something special about grabbing something that you actually know where it came from, and you know the story of how it got there. And that's sort of what I want to push with Maine wood and a Maine wood brand. Next slide, please. So as I said before, our goal at the Lumbery is to see clearly labeled, easily recognizable Maine wood products at every lumber store in the state. And if we want to make the brand the Lumbery certified brand, I am all for that as well. And I just want to thank everyone for participating. And if anyone stops at the Lumbery in Cape Elizabeth, I will go into this whole speech again for you. Because I just want to get the word out, and the more you let people know, the more they buy in and the more they ask for Maine wood. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mike. And I commend you for all of the work that you're doing to shine a light on the importance of local wood. And I do think this branding is an intriguing idea. I'm sure there's a lot to it. There's probably a lot of layers that would need to be worked out, but I do think it's an idea and a good idea. And I hope you make it happen. So
yeah. I hope so too. Thanks, Heather,
for sharing that with us. So we are going to open up to the Q&A portion of the meeting. We did have a few great questions submitted with registration, and I know that some of you have been adding additional questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to continue to do that using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try our best to get to them all. So I'd like to kick us off with a general question to kind of ground us. And I put it out there to everyone, to each of our presenters, if you feel moved to comment on this. What do you think are some of the biggest myths about Maine lumber, and what are the actual facts?
Lee, you want to try this one?
Well, one of the myths I think people associate logging with destruction. I think it's a common myth, held by people across the country, and it's really hard to deal with that. I mean, Maine has some of the best forestry in the country, and there's, as one of the slides that Mike showed you, was the percentage or the number of acres that are under one of these certification protocols. But there's like half a dozen different brands of forestry that are really active in Maine. I mean, if you're interested in birds, there's a way to manage your woods to promote bird habitat. If you're interested in carbon sequestration, there's ways to steward your property to accelerate carbon sequestration. Maine is just a real ferment hotbed of sort of cutting edge forestry. And it's just a shame that, people associate logging with destruction. And, you know, it is, when you first see it, it's kind of raw. You do have, a lot of people have gut reactions like, oh, that must be terrible. Look at those poor trees. They've been cut down. But there are really beneficial kinds of forestry, and there's lots of different kinds of examples. And come on our tour and we'll show you one of them anyway.
Anyone want to add to that, Mike or Hal?
No, I think I'm good at the moment.
All right, so let's move on. One of the questions that came in earlier was, how do we harvest wood for building from our own land? And are there sources of scrap wood or mulch available locally? There's a lot there.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Lee?
Well, I mean, there are lots of portable sawmills. There's a website that the Wood Miser brand of portable sawmills has a listing of sawmills in Maine that, you know, who's doing it. You can, you know, call them up, find out where the nearest one is. There is a strong attachment to harvesting wood from your own woodlot to like really reduce your transportation. But when you get into it, it sometimes isn't as economical as people think it should be. Because if you're harvesting wood for building a house, it needs to be kiln dried, which is usually some transportation, often plain, that might be more transportation. And the cost of moving that wood around in small quantities is sometimes kind of more expensive than people realize. So it's I know people love to do it, but and some people are just committed to doing it regardless. It is way easier to do that if you're building a garage or a barn or outbuilding where the wood doesn't need to be kiln dried. It's way more practical to do that. But as I say, there's lots of portable sawmills out there that aren't too hard to find.
Yeah,
Are
I
they
just
listed
want to say
on your website?
Well, we're adding portable sawmills to our website. We hadn't had them on there before because there's a lot of turnover in the portable sawmill business. And so we didn't list them originally, but that's in our next update. We're going to try to get as many as we can.
Yeah, I
you want to add
just want to
something,
add
Mike?
that. Yeah, I just want to add that I applaud the people that take that effort, and I don't want to discourage them, but we're in an urban environment where we are, and a lot of people come in saying, great giant oak tree just fell down in our yard. I'm sure you want it. And I say, no, we don't want it, because as Lee said, it takes a lot of effort to cut it, plane it. And then if you're going to air dry it, it needs to air dry covered for 2 years at least, which takes a lot of space. So ideally, I do think there are some urban tree reclamation companies, but it is a lot of work.
Is it Maine Urban Timber? Is that one that you wrote about, Lee?
Yeah, that's one. There's a number of them. They mostly produce live edge slab wood for, like, if you want to build a table or a counter, you can get some gorgeous wood from them. But if you're building a barn or a house or something, you wouldn't get it from reclaimed street trees.
You're on mute, Heather. Oh, there
Okay,
you go.
thanks. The next question is for Hal. Peter Moore wrote in and asked if red pine and eastern hemlock are also treated in roundwood dimensions.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yes, they are. More the red pine than the hemlock. We, with our sawmill venture, we also have a fence post operation. And so we do have, we are producing a round fence post product. And then of course, utility poles are also sourced in the Maine forest, and that's another product, a telephone utility pole, which are of course treated as well. So yes, you can. Now, a hemlock typically isn't done in a roundwood product, just perhaps because it's not that heavy to sapwood, and well, I guess it's just not been the custom. I don't know that it couldn't, but it hasn't.
I have a question for you, Hal. Where do you get treated red pine in the state of Maine today?
Well, it was interesting. I was watching the slides of the various mills that Mike is using, and on in this thing, he had a slide of Machineral lumber, and Mike, George saws red pine, and you could probably get the 5/4 decking, even though we didn't hit that one off very well, Lee, but we could probably get it from Machineral lumber, and it can come through Mechanic Falls and get treated, and there you are. You can get it at in Maine. Does that answer your question, Lee?
Well, I mean, can't we get red pine through any retail lumber yard in Maine that has a relationship with your company?
Yeah, that's true too. That's absolutely true. I mean, that on the the big picture, yeah, the more commodity part of the picture, yes. The answer is yes. Unfortunately, we're still learning with the sawmill, and we're primarily producing our timbers, 4x4s, 4x6, 6x6, but we'll be producing other products as we venture further into it.
Okay. There's a question about Maine red oak. Why can't I get Maine red oak? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
Gosh, I would think it'd be very available. Lee?
Not sure.
I think it is. I'm
Thoughts
surprised.
on where?
Well, I know that Days Hardwood in Freeport, Atlantic Hardwood in Portland, I'm sure it's got red oak. Seacoast Hardwood in Sanford, I know it's got red oak. And I mean, red oak is a local species. So local means it might come from New Hampshire, but they're not sending it from Pennsylvania. I'm sure it's all fairly local. The red oak, other kinds of oak are more harder to get a hold of. White oak is much more of a southern species. I think it's harder to get white oak from Maine, but I think red oak's fairly available.
I would think, Mike, you would be able to get it with some of your mills. Again, I think George does saw at Machinos, does saw oak, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't saw red oak. So
yeah, we don't deal too much with hardwoods because we're trying to focus a lot on building supplies, siding, decking, framing, things like that.
okay.
But we do have a small selection of hardwoods, and we do get it from Hopkins up in Holton.
Yeah.
So this will be a there are no silly questions, but this will be an uneducated question. So you said that you carry mostly softwoods because you're primarily sourcing building materials. Is that the case, that most building materials are softwood, and is there a reason for that?
Maybe Lee could speak to this more, but I just think it's more readily available and easier to work with. I mean, the hardwoods, no one's really pounding nails into hard oak to frame a house out.
That makes sense.
And their pine is fairly prolific in the state. So most of the trim boards are pine, framing is spruce or fir. And we do sell some hemlock as well. And for decking, we do the cedar. So our focus is sort of, we figure almost everyone has a house or lives in a house, and how could we get the most product out to the most people?
Yes. All right, another question that came in through the registration process. How much of Maine's harvested timber is converted to lumber, and how much of it is consumed in Maine? Does anyone know?
That is a question that nobody can answer. It's surprising that that's the case, but the way they track wood in Maine, they track the logs from the harvest to the mill, but nobody can tell you where those boards and 2x4s end up. And I know that a tremendous amount of wood is exported from the state of Maine. It's exported in the form of paper. It's exported in the form of pine boards and trim. Maine produces a ton of that stuff. And if all they did was sell it in the state of Maine, they'd all, be a lot smaller than they are now, because their markets are East Coast. They're selling some of them are selling more than just East Coast too. But it's one of those proprietary things that the companies resisted reporting that kind of information because it felt like they compromised their business. So they can tell you where the logs are going and how many logs there are, but they can't tell you the finished products. Yeah. Unfortunately, and it's strange in this day and age where we feel like we can track everything. Wood is a commodity for the most part, and once it gets into the chain of custody, it just kind of disappears, and it's a mystery.
I have kind of an interesting take on that. We're here located in Maine, and most of my customer base is Maine, and so my customer base is 1.3 million people, and then I do some in New Hampshire, I do some in Mass, and I do some in Vermont, but not much. Now, like my competitors, say down in Rhode Island, their customer base is potentially 17 million. Another one that's in Western Mass has a population that he can sell to that's like 30 million. And that has a lot to do with what you're saying too, is that the market in Maine is so small population wise that it is difficult to track where the lumber would go.
Another question, how do we persuade landowners to manage their land responsibly?
Hal, why don't you try that one?
I think that they manage it very responsibly. We have one of the most, as you were trying to say before, Lee, is that, and I think Mike did as well, is that this is one of the most responsibly managed forests probably in the world. And so much of it's private landowners, and they make their living growing trees, and that's what they want to continue to do, and that's what they've been doing for a long time. And you know, those trees, the sustainable forest, help the wildlife and everything else. You mentioned earlier the birds and you name it. And I think that Maine is blessed with a very responsible forest industry.
Yeah, I find that when the people that live in Maine are the ones that harvest the land in Maine, they're more likely to take care of their own land as opposed to outside investors, because they're snowmobiling, they're hunting, they're recreating in the woods, and it's in their own interest to preserve their own land. And it sort of is just a common sense approach.
And one thing any landowner could do that would be smart is to, if you're interested in growing trees for timber, and not everybody is, but if you're interested in growing trees for timber, you should work with a forester rather than just a logger. And a lot of people get them confused. What's the difference between a logger and a forester? They kind of sound the same. Don't they both work with trees? But a forester is, I mean, if you make an analogy, the forester is like the architect and the logger is like the builder. The forester looks at the forest and figures out, you know, what are the best species to encourage here? How are we going to encourage wildlife here? And then gives the instructions to the logger. A lot of people, if they're short-sighted, they'll say, well, why should I hire a forester if, you know, if I work with a logger, he's just going to pay me for the wood. So why would I pay a forester when a logger is going to pay me? And the answer to that is that if you work with a forester, the forester is going to have better relationships, well, not exclusively, but can have better relationships with mills, can sell your wood at a higher price so that you get paid more, the forester gets paid, the logger gets paid, and the forest is better off for having done that than if the landowner says, oh, I'll just work with a logger. They know what they're doing. Most of them do, but they have, you know, shorthand ways of doing things that aren't as good for the health of the forest. So the easiest, simplest thing to do if you're a landowner is to work with a forester.
Adding that's really helpful. I think you're right. There probably are a lot of folks who don't know the difference. And that definitely sounds like a more sustainable approach.
And most people, if they're homeowners, you know, if they have to take down a tree, they have to pay somebody, and they have to pay them a ton of money to take down a single tree. So it's hard for people to wrap their minds around the fact that if you own woods, you don't pay somebody to take down a tree. They pay you. You have something valuable, and you should work with a forester to nurture that value so that it's always going to be there for the long term. Anyway. I
think we have a couple final questions. One is for folks who are watching tonight and will watch the recording in the future, what are some of the best ways to start incorporating more local species into our project? So like, are there species from Maine that are easier to access, that are easier to use? Any tips, kind of general tips? Aside from going to the Lumbery.
Yeah, I'd say definitely check out Local Woodworks, his site, and find out all the little family mills. It's, as I said in my presentation, they all get their wood from within 40 miles of their land, and it's high quality wood. And there are so many family mills throughout Maine, and I don't want to lose business from the Lumbery, but in our area, there's Machino Lumber, which makes incredible pine. And then there's a bunch of white cedar mills around, which are worth a trip to. And do some research of what you could replace Maine wood with. Like, so many people just go with red cedar siding, which isn't necessary. They could just go with white cedar siding. And the same with decking. I mean, what Hal was saying, if there are alternatives in Maine to deck your, your outside space, do a little research and you could do it.
Yeah, I would suggest to use local wood in places that are really visible in your house, whether it's a deck, a floor, a mantle, siding, somewhere so that you can talk about it. Because if you just go ahead and, get some 2x4s from Maine and then they're buried in the wall, you can't talk about it as easily. And I think that's one of the things about having locally sourced wood, is to be able to talk about it and showcase its beauty. So I would definitely, you don't have to do it everywhere, but find a couple of, real showcase places in your house.
Yeah, and interesting thing, when prices went crazy this summer, when a 2x4 was about $13, people started moving from spruce 2x4s to hemlock. So the mills that would do pine and hemlock, they milled so much hemlock that then there was a shortage of pine. But it just goes to show that people were thinking creatively, like, okay, spruce is a fortune. What can I do? And obviously people were calling around and finding alternatives, and great alternative was hemlock.
All right, I have one final question for you. What are some of the current real or perceived roadblocks to growing the market for Maine lumber, and any suggestions on how to address them?
I think Mike hit it on the head with this branding concept. I think that really needs to be developed.
Yeah, and get the word out. I think there needs to be just a big push, because I don't think, when people buy lobster, they assume it's from Maine. And I think that when people buy wood, they assume their wood's from Maine. I mean, for 25 years as a carpenter, I never even blinked. I never even thought what I was buying wasn't from Maine. You just presume that the wood you're getting comes from the closest source. So there's so many carpenters just like me out there. We just need to educate them and say, do you know where your wood comes from? Do you know you could get a local species for the same price? It's exposure, and it's just getting it out there.
Sure. I'm inspired by things that all of you have said in terms of the importance of the stories of these mills. It's sort of like when the local food movement kind of had its renaissance. It was so connected to the stories of the farms, and that inspires us to, have an emotional connection to it. So I think there's a lot to telling stories about our local wood producers, and I think that will help us make some progress. So with that, we have come to the end of today's session. And I would once again like to thank you for joining our Home and Energy Chats. I hope you learned some helpful new information. And thank you again to our sponsors, Royal River Heat Pumps, Senecal Construction Services, and Bath Savings. Thank you to Maggie Perkins and Rain Rayner, who have been managing everything so beautifully behind the scenes. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us this evening. We do have a special thank you gift that we'll be mailing to each of you. A treat from our favorite local chocolatier, Dean Sweets, and a complimentary subscription or gift subscription, if you already have a subscription, to Green and Healthy Maine magazines. And if you have any questions that we did not get to today, we will be including contact information for our panelists in a follow-up email, along with a link to the recording. And that will also be available on our website at greenmainhomes.com. We have an exciting lineup of programs for the 2 more programs this fall, including our next episode in November, which is all about mold and indoor air quality, and then December about the Pretty Good House model. Pretty excited about both of those. And you'll find all the details, including the calendar, the full calendar, on our website. And last but not least, you'll see a brief survey pop up when we close the webinar. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's session to help us craft future programming. And thank you again, and I hope you have a great night. Thank
Heather.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lee. Bye,
Good
Hal.
night.